Good morning, Nashville. This is Matt Bassett on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Thanks for being with us this morning. We have Mac Morey in the booth. Good morning, Mac.
Hello. Good morning, Matt. Good to have you back.
Thank you. Great to be back. And we will have Ken Weaver bringing us all of the latest news updates throughout the show. Great to be back with Brother Ken. And we have had a busy news weekend, and we've got a lot of stuff to cover. Just to let folks know what's coming up on the show, we've got some great guests for you this morning. We have I call him the Supreme Court Whisperer, Mark Paoletta. He has been instrumental in almost outside of the president, two presidents, and Mitch McConnell. He's been one of the single biggest influencers on getting us the constitutional conservative Supreme Court that we enjoy today. He was instrumental in getting Justice Clarence Thomas confirmed. He has consulted and vetted most of the others, including Neil Gorsuch. And he is going to talk about the unprecedented attacks coming from the left against our Supreme Court justices. It is an unbelievable effort. He is right in the middle of it, defending Justice Clarence Thomas and the others. And so we're going to get his perspective coming up at the bottom of the hour. So you'll want to stick around for that. We also are going to have one of my favorites who's made a lot of news on his own this weekend. Senator Bill Hagerty will be joining us at the top of the hour. He has some announcements to make, and then we're going to do a deep dive on the growing threat of China, also some of the the disaster that continues to be our southern border. But we're going to cover a lot with Senator Hagerty, who's been kind enough in a very busy week to give us a half an hour of his time. So we'll have a chance to get into all of that. At the bottom of around the 10:30 hour, we want to open it up, Mac, and take some calls from everything that the super texters and our listening audience has had a chance to hear in the hour. And then at 11 o'clock, we will have my senator, State Senator Jack Johnson, who is going to walk us through everything going on with the legislature, the good, the bad, the other, give us a wrap up on all the work that he is doing there. So we will look forward to having him as well. And it does seem like that Nashville has been the center of national news. It's almost like local, state, and national is all combined into one, and Nashville has been the center of the universe for all kinds of reasons for the last couple weeks here, some good, some obviously awful. But this weekend, all of the RNC donors came to town for a retreat. And that has generated a lot of buzz, and we are getting a lot of coverage from the national media here. Obviously, President Trump was back in town. I had gotten a text from a friend that said it appears that President Trump, Kid Rock, John Daly are out at a local golf course, and he asked me if I was the fourth. And I was not the fourth. In fact, our guest coming up, Senator Hagerty, was. So we'll have to see what it's like to play with golf with President Trump, because I wouldn't know. And I had a super texter just ask, "Are you bitter about that?" And a little bit, a little bit. You serve for the guy for 2.5 years, and you don't get tapped. It's fine. But when I do eventually get to play with him, when the president's looking at that 3-foot putt, you better believe I'm going to tell him to put a little change on it. and people say to me all the time, "Oh, like you'd actually do that." And I say to them, "Do you know me?" And it becomes a great story if he happens to miss the 3-foot putt, which apparently he doesn't do very often. But we will get into all of that. But it was an interesting retreat, and just following some of the news, the way Politico has covered this. So this is an article by Natalie Allison. Donald Trump stood before Republican National Committee donors on Saturday to make his case for a return to the White House, arguing that he deserves another chance to finish a dramatic party transformation that he started nearly 8 years ago. In his remarks, the GOP elite gathered at the Four Seasons Hotel. Trump traded the election grievance rhetoric that has defined him for the last 2 years in the public eye for a different type of message, his vision for the future, while arguing that he single-handedly saved the Republican Party from the establishment class when he won in 2016. Trump, quote, Republicans were a party known for starting wars overseas, cutting Social Security and Medicare at home, and pushing mass amnesty for illegal aliens, unquote. Which happens to be true. Finishing this thought, declaring that the old Republican Party is gone and is never coming back. And then there was another article out talking about how the establishment is furious that he is still the nominee. And it's some of the similar voices. By the way, just a note, you may have noticed that they had raised Mike Pompeo's name at the beginning of the conference, only to have Mike Pompeo come out and announce that he is not running for president. And in his words, quote, this is not my time. And so I think there is a clear sense that Trump is obviously going to be the clear front runner. And his fundraising prowess has only grown since the controversies a few weeks ago and his arraignment in New York. I think in the first quarter, he had taken in $18 million, and in 2 weeks following his trial, he took in almost $15 million. So he is wildly ahead in almost every poll that you look at across the board, up on Governor DeSantis by more than 30 points. And it's something that he's the clear front runner. He is got a lot of momentum, and really finds himself in a pretty good situation. And you know, he makes the case that you could pick another candidate that promises to do the things that I have done, or you can pick the person who has done it. And at this point, that is seeming to be a very compelling argument. Now, in addition to everything about Donald Trump in the news, I saw just a litany of articles, and of the things that keep me up at night, China is clearly at the forefront of that. It's something that most Americans recognize, that we are in an adversarial relationship with them. And in fact, we are in a new Cold War with them. In fact, the only people who don't seem to recognize this is President Biden and his administration. And so we're going to do a deep dive into China and some of the things that are going on there, not just here at home, but around the world. And we're going to get into that with Senator Haggerty at the top of the hour. But just turning back to all the articles that came out on this weekend, it was somewhat overwhelming. Turning to this concept of a Cold War with them. Reading from Politico, at a recent congressional hearing, former Deputy National Security Advisor Matt Pottinger testified that many of our political class have failed to acknowledge. Although America has long sought peace and cooperation with China, it does us little good to repeat again and again that we are seeking to avoid a new Cold War when China has been stealthily waging one against us for years. The Chinese Communist Party, both through its words and action, has made clear that it intends to overtake the United States and restructure the global order in its image. The People's Republic of China has viewed the U.S. as a strategic rival and long ago deployed Cold War tactics against us, even as America has opened its economy and its borders in a misguided engagement strategy. And again, this is something that we just do not see the White House acknowledging or even leading on. And one of the ways that it showed up in the national news this weekend was dealing with Taiwan. And last week, House Foreign Affairs Chairman Michael McCaul of Texas led a bipartisan delegation to Taiwan to discuss the security of the island. And it's something that I know people have different opinions on what is happening in Ukraine, but I think it's pretty easy to make an argument that our strategic interests in Taiwan are far greater than what Ukraine has ever been. When you consider that 60% of all global trade moves through the Taiwan Straits. And when you add to that 90% of advanced semiconductor manufacturing takes place there, we have a valued strategic interest in making sure that China does not invade and take over this island. So while Chairman McCaul is there, this is how much it upset China. And this is really unprecedented. 10 battleships surrounded the island, plus an aircraft carrier, and there were 70 Chinese fighter jets in the air the entire time that they were there. They clearly do not like Americans showing support for our friends in Taiwan. And the Taiwanese president, Xi, is in a very difficult situation. For his part in this, China has sanctioned Chairman McCaul, which he says he wears as a badge of honor, claiming that he seriously violated the One China principle. Now, they didn't like it when Speaker McCarthy met with President Xi a few weeks ago back in California. But this is something that we just have to get past, and we have to point out the importance of our support for them. So China has a number of options here. All of theirs seem to be a lot better for ours. But to, again, draw the distinction between Ukraine, you have to understand that the Taiwanese government has paid the United States. We're not giving them weapons as we are in Ukraine. They have paid for 22 weapon systems to the tune of $20 billion. This is what the Taiwanese have paid the United States government, and they have received none of this. And it asks the big question of why. And so when this delegation went over, they met with our allies in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And all of them are asking the question, Chairman McCaul made the point, he signed off on these weapon systems 3 to 5 years ago. And so obviously, President Xi's first question is, hey guys, when do I get my weapons? And it's a fair question to ask, because there is no deterrence right now on behalf of the United States to make China not want to do this. And I'll get to this a little more in a minute. But they have no ability right now to defend themselves. And the intelligence community, including leaked documents, and we're going to get to the leaker as well, because that was just a disastrous story that continues to get worse and worse. But they don't have the intelligence. They need something called ISR satellites, which does intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. China has it in spades, but Taiwan does not. China also has spies all over the island. So if China does invade, our friends in Taiwan at this point aren't even going to see it coming. We are going to do a quick commercial break, and we will come right back finishing up on all of this, and then we're going to get to our great guests. So stay with us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
The launch of the biggest ever space rocket has been postponed, and the House Judiciary Committee on a bit of a field trip to go after Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. We'll tell you about it at 9:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
And we're back. Thank you, Ken. Continuing on the growing threat from China, and no one is more threatened by China than our friends and allies in Taiwan. And, you know, folks, there is no NATO in the Pacific. It's just us. It's not like Ukraine in that sense. And so one of the key questions that has to be asked is, how committed are others in the region to supporting Taiwan in the eventuality or the case of a blockade or an invasion? General Keane was on the news programs, Jack Keane, this weekend. And his sense is that they basically have a plan A and a plan B as it relates to Taiwan. Plan A is to affect the outcome of the next election, which is coming up in January, and to install their own puppet government there. They're actually meeting and vetting their preferred candidates now in China. Talk about election interference. And if that fails, their plan B is a blockade of the island and or an invasion. So where are we? So the United States, we have a military base, a huge one in Guam. We have the 7th Fleet in Japan. And we also have operations out of South Korea. And we have a forwarding operating base out of the Philippines. But again, the question becomes, would these countries support us and allow us to use these in defense of Taiwan? Now, it might strike you that this is a question that the White House should be taking on, not a Texas congressman, even though he chairs the Foreign Relations Committee. But in the absence of the White House doing this, there is a lot of work that needs to be done, taking into account things that we are seeing happening now. And we need to wake up. We need to get them the weapons that, again, they have paid for. We need to get them the Starlight surveillance satellites, and we need to start mounting an aggressive deterrence. And people use the word deterrence, but I want to just talk real briefly about what that means. Deterrence, simply put, is that we make it so that the cost of China is too great to invade or blockade Taiwan, or that the outcome is uncertain. This is strategic thinking 101, and it's not happening. There is no deterrence in place today. Now, the White House will counter saying, well, we have the largest defense budget ever, but this statement is really very misleading. When you consider the fact that at the height of the Cold War with Russia in the 80s, we were spending 6% of our gross domestic product on defense. Today, we are spending 3% of our gross domestic product on defense. So that doesn't even keep up with inflation. And our enemies know this. So this is something that we really have to get a handle on very, very quickly. And it's not just in Taiwan where our strategic interests are being threatened. This is all over the world, where under the Biden administration, we have pulled back and withdrawn. China is moving in, and they are moving in with authority. You can literally go all around the world, and they documented this in a myriad of articles this weekend. China is ahead in Africa. This from the Washington Post. I'm sorry, Times. Quote, Beijing is out-trading and out-investing the U.S. across Africa by nearly 400%, putting the Chinese Communist Party in the driver's seat of an increasingly Cold War-style competition for friends and influence on the world's fastest-growing continent with one of the largest reserves of precious metals and other resources. Joseph Sani, who heads the African Center of the United States Institute for Peace. They are dwarfing us when it comes to commercial investment and trade. He goes on to say, even if China's investment involves non-transparency and exploitation, their increased commercial engagement has forced Washington to shift its priorities. The Biden administration is facing the challenge of flipping the script as it relates to U.S. policy. Instead of seeing Africa as the weakest link in a network of American allies and partners around the world and shaping U.S. policy purely around aid, we need to start leading with trade and investment, but we have a lot of catch-up compared to do. And this is frustrating to me because our former president left us in a much better position. He set up the U.S. Agency for International Development to counter China's massive belt and road investments there. 52 countries have at least nominally signed up for Beijing's massive infrastructure financing program, which is involved in developing ports in Djibouti and Algeria, rail lines in Kenya, Tanzania, and Nigeria, and dams and solar power farms in Sudan, among other projects. Back in 2016, Trump, I remember I was there, he signed a bill that created the U.S. International Development Finance Corp. And he put my colleague, Adam Bowler, in charge of it. And they merged public-private funds with the USAID. And it essentially doubled Washington's funds for ensuring private investment by American companies to the tune of $60 billion. They also created the Prosper Africa Initiative with USAID and increased two-way trade deals. And Biden has completely let this collapse. Now, Senator Hagerty just got back from a big trip to South America. Are you aware that China owns both sides of the Panama Canal there? I just don't know how we let this stuff happen, but we're going to get into all of these issues. We are going to do a quick commercial break, and we will be back with the tremendous American Mark Paoletta. So stay with us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Got some road construction slowing down 24 in Murfreesboro again. It is only one lane open, 24 eastbound right there at Joe B. Jackson Parkway. Stop and go traffic due to construction, about an 18-minute delay. Well, the launch of the biggest ever space rocket, Starship by SpaceX, has been postponed. Elon Musk blaming what he says was a frozen valve. The vehicle is being put to the test in the hope that it could eventually take people to other planets. Governor Bill Lee signing the Transportation Modernization Act today. The $3.3 billion plan includes funding to look into the use of so-called choice lanes to decrease traffic and congestion. Choice lanes would be for commuters willing to pay a fee to use to get to places faster. And the House Judiciary Committee holding a hearing in New York City to shine a light on Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, whom Chairman Jim Jordan says is ignoring violent criminals to go after former President Trump instead.
Rather than enforcing the law, the DA is using his office to do the bidding of left-wing campaign funders. He's taken a soft-on-crime approach to the real criminals.
That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
A Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA. Which one should we do? A lot of people struggle over this particular decision. And I'll just give you a couple tools to figure out what might be better for you. Think about it this way. Let's say if I had $1,000 that I was thinking about investing, that was income, $1,000 of income. With an IRA, let's say that you're in a 30% tax bracket. Let's say there is such a thing. And you want to put this money in an IRA. You're going to save $300 in taxes. Now, if you go post-tax with like a Roth IRA, this is how much goes into the Roth IRA. Now, let's say that later on down the road, we have this money and it didn't grow at all, just to keep the math really simple. And let's say that at some point in the future, you're in a lower tax bracket, because the way our tax system works is that your first income is taxed at a really low rate, and then you get up into higher rates, 10%, 12%, 22%, and so on and so forth. It gets higher. If you're earning income and you're at that particular tax rate up there, you might want to avoid that tax rate right now and take the income at a later point in time when you're in a lower average tax rate. Now let's say that you're in a 10% bracket down here when you pull the money. How much are you going to pay in taxes? 10% of $1,000 is $100. How much do you get to spend? $900. Well, even though I didn't have growth, I had growth because of the difference between my tax rate here and here. And that's the idea. That's one of the things that we look at. We look at Social Security taxation, income taxation, and a lot of factors that might drive you in a higher or lower brackets in the future. If you want to learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call or call 615-851-1950.
And we're back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Good morning, Nashville, and thanks for being with us. We are working to secure Mark Paoletta on the phone. We just had a little static. We'll have him back with us in just a moment. Mark is an amazing American. He served as the general counsel to the Office of Management and the Budget, which was a group that gave me fits when I served at HHS, because everything we wanted to do, we had to go through that office. But they were great, and he ended his service career as a counsel to the Vice President Pence. And Mark has had a very interesting career, and I would say outside of President Trump and Mitch McConnell, he is as responsible for giving us, which is a bright light and sometimes a dark time, which is our Supreme Court, a constitutional, conservative Supreme Court. And he was instrumental in getting Clarence Thomas confirmed. He is a personal good friend of his, personal attorney of his. He also had a hand in working with almost all of our other nominees, from Neil Gorsuch to Amy Coney Barrett. He has been involved with almost everyone on the court. And one of the very disturbing things that we're seeing from the left is what is really a relentless and unprecedented attack on the court. I think there is great frustration on the left that the Supreme Court looks to be in a place where we're going to be in charge for quite some time, and they don't like the constitutional rule of law. And so they are going after these individuals in ways that in the past was just completely unacceptable, trying to pressure these justices. And I think we might have Mark on the line. Mark, are you with us? Hey, how are you? Sorry about the phone static.
That's okay. I'm all good. But I was hearing a little bit of your intro, and I 100% agree with this, with your description of what's going on.
Now, take us through it. Take us through what you're seeing, because I know you're right in the middle of all of it.
Yeah, it's actually scary, Matt, what is going on. And that is that, as you said, I mean, the court is the bright light. The court is a constitutional, originalist, conservative, call it what you will, court that's returning the Supreme Court to its original sort of purpose, which is to interpret the law as it's written and apply it. And what we saw for many, many years was the court kind of making up policies, kind of being a super legislature. And I think, over the past few years with President Trump's great appointments, and I was blessed to be able to work on many of them, including Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and found Amy Barrett for the Seventh Circuit, who ultimately went up to the Supreme Court. The left started attacking the court, and as you ran up to Dobbs, you saw the unprecedented leak of that opinion to try and blow up the court. And I think you saw the most amazing term last year with the Supreme Court, and I think it hit the left really hard. Like, this is real. They kept warning about this, and now it's real. These justices are kind of handing down opinions that are truly originalist. And what I mean by that, that's like the Dobbs opinion, overruling Roe v. Wade. Why? Because there's no constitutional right to an abortion in the Constitution. The Bruin case, which was the Second Amendment case, recognizing the rights the Second Amendment confers on citizens with respect to their firearms, and you saw the religious liberty case. You saw what I call reigning in the administrative state, so that the federal government doesn't do stupid stuff, as I call it. And so now, right, having lived through that term, they see this next term that's in process right now, and they just want to literally burn down the Supreme Court. So you see, again, as you mentioned, I'm very close to Justice Thomas. I represented the justice's wife when they went after her in the January 6th investigation. So we've been seeing this a lot with Justice Thomas over the years. They've been after him literally since 1980, tried to take him out, during his confirmation. But what you're also seeing, Matt, it's larger than Justice Thomas. They are going after Justice Alito, right? They had what I consider a liar, testify about how he allegedly leaked the Dobbs opinion many years ago, which is completely false. And I think that person was completely discredited and kind of crawled back in his hole. But you also saw the attacks on Chief Justice Roberts and his wife, who is a legal recruiter. And so there have been a number of articles in the New York Times, in this magazine called Politico, attacking Jane Roberts for her legal recruiting work, and somehow that's unethical. They went after Justice Barrett's husband for practicing law in Washington, and somehow there's these so-called conflicts of interest. So and you saw, obviously, with Senator Schumer, when he literally stood on the steps of the Supreme Court in 2021 and said, I'm warning you, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and it was about an abortion case, if you go forward with these opinions, you won't know what hit you. And as we know, Matt, an assassin right, came to try and kill Justice Kavanaugh, right? And again, none of this gets really covered by the mainstream press, by the corporate press, call it what you will. Literally, an assassin was going to kill Justice Kavanaugh and had other names. And it has all been put in play by the left. And so you're seeing this continuation now. And I think the leader of the court, right, both as a intellectual force, but also as a role model of how to stand up to the mob, is Clarence Thomas. I really do believe that. I think he's our greatest justice.
Amen.
And so they're coming back after him, and they're going after him. You know, these recent stories about how he went on some trips with his good friend Harlan Crow, and somehow that's the world's going to end. I mean, Justice Thomas, complied with the rules, and even the stories that were coming out showed how the rules as written at the time allowed him to accept these trips from his friend and not have to disclose them. They changed the rule literally in March of this year to change that and sort of prohibit it. But all before then, it was perfectly acceptable. And I call it the gaslighting of the Supreme Court, because they don't tell you about all the trips that Ruth Bader Ginsburg went on, or Stephen Breyer, who was the Mr. Traveler, the King Traveler, I say, of flying. He flew on corporate jets of David Rubenstein, who's a billionaire. So they want to focus on these issues with Justice Thomas or whoever the conservative is, and make people think that it's wrong, or that no one else does it, or something like that. And it's just because the left wants to destroy the court, sort of try and get them to back off of opinions. I think that's what was happening with the Dobbs leak. And I think what I was really proud of is that none of those justices, right, that were on that draft opinion sort of caved and fell off the opinion or somehow tried to change their vote. And I think that was a big lesson for the Supreme Court, that these attacks are coming. And I think it's actually drawn the justices closer in some way, of kind of being under constant attack in this regard.
Sure. Mark, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought. I'm just curious. Obviously, these are ramping up now. And so my question is to you, why is it now? Is it the left? It's kind of sinking in that they aren't going to be able to pack the court. They aren't going to be able to blow up the institution. Our justices do have lifetime tenure, and it is just like fingernails on a chalkboard to them that they cannot now use the court to legislate their woke agenda on the country that most of the country does not want and does not agree with, and they're just going through apoplectic fits over this?
100%, Matt. And when I say ramping up, the way the court works, they sit in October. They start sitting in October. They hear cases, and they're hearing cases today, actually. And then they're handing down opinions. And the big opinions come down in June, the end of June, right? So like the abortion case last year, the Second Amendment case, the EPA case, which, reined in the EPA from running all over and terrorizing, homeowners and business people. So that's what's happening here. You have that really, really big case on affirmative action, right? The discriminatory racist admissions policies of Harvard and University of North Carolina, that opinion will come down. And, the court watchers will say, it looks like it's going to be, an opinion which is going to strike down those policies. And so,
Mark, real quick, can I just ask you what I know you don't know a date, but is there any sense of the timing on that, or are there any rumors up there on when that might come out?
I don't have any inside knowledge. Generally, the big cases, I call them, cases big, but it's going to be the end of June. Last year they went into the first couple of days in July, but those big cases, they won't come out before the end of June.
And as these come out, and they're ruling on these just crucial cases, whether it's the First Amendment, whether it's, regarding free speech, whether it's the Second Amendment, whether it's state laws that protect women's sports. As they rule and these cases make their way through the process and make their way to the Supreme Court, do you think that do you envision that these attacks are only going to intensify against conservative justices?
Yes, and in fact, it's amazing what you see. This, and I think it's just limited to the conservative justices, but the amount of armed security around them that live with them. Okay, they're fortresses at their homes now. Okay, there are actionable death threats. Okay, these are civil servants. These are justices, and this has never happened before until the Dobbs case was leaked. In terms of the security, it has never been this way before, and now there is a significant amount of security around the justices, or several of the justices, and so it just shows you what the left has fomented in a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous way. And it's only going to intensify because there were protests outside the Thomas home last week. Now they live on a private drive, and it's a little bit away from it. But the bottom line is, it's a dangerous situation, and it's fueled by the left by going after, in my view, these so-called ethical things to try and tear them down and foment it like it's an illegitimate court, so that when they come down with these opinions, they want the American people not to listen to them. And if you recall, Matt, right, last week, I think it was, AOC, Congresswoman AOC said that the FDA should not listen to a ruling by a federal judge. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Flat out came out and said that. So it is all
They only like the rule of law when it suits them, Mark.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so it's so dangerous. You had conservatives for many, many years being disappointed by the Supreme Court time and time again. I lived through that. I've been involved with, the judicial selections and all that process, going all the way back to the Bush 41 when President Bush selected Justice Thomas. But there's been so many rulings that broke our hearts. It's so many, right? Were we going to storm the homes of the liberal justices? It wouldn't have occurred to anyone, right? We live in a civil society. We're passionate about our views and our views on the rule of law. We lose. We don't go, threaten, death to justices or go pick it outside their home. That's against the law. And as you saw with, Attorney General Garland, who was very disingenuous up when he was before Congress about, no marshal made any arrests. That's because they were told not to make any arrests by the Department of Justice. So it's a dangerous situation right now.
It is, and it just seems like the left wants to be tolerant of anything and everything, except for conservative constitutional views. And I can't thank you enough for your efforts here. I know this is a big week. You're a great friend of the program, and I hope if this becomes a crazy news cycle with you, that you'll come back and update us on where things have gone.
Happy to do that, Matt. Always happy to be on your show.
Mark, thanks for doing the Lord's work in the Devil's Town. We appreciate you, and we will be right back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
10 o'clock on the dot this Monday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Got the full forecast in 2 minutes. Traffic problems right now in Murfreesboro, 24 eastbound. Only one lane open due to construction starting there at Joe B. Jackson Parkway. That's exit 84. Governor Lee has signed the Transportation Modernization Act into law. It invests $3.3 billion in roads to keep up with growth and ease traffic congestion. Some of the money will go to look into creating choice lanes, which commuters could pay a fee to use to get where they need to go faster. Better luck next time. Jim Ryan says a test of the world's largest rocket is on hold.
The clock was ticking down to liftoff when a pressurization issue with the Super Heavy rocket signaled that the launch from the SpaceX facility in South Texas wouldn't happen today. The countdown did continue to allow other procedures to be tested, but the clock stopped at T-minus 10 seconds. They'll try again on Wednesday to launch an uncrewed vehicle into space for a single trip around the Earth.
Now, NASA has plans to use the Starship rocket to land on the moon in 2025. Well, the House Judiciary Committee is meeting in Manhattan today to shine a light on what they call Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's soft on crime policies. Chairman Jim Jordan says Bragg is ignoring violent crime to go after former President Trump.
In this country, justice is supposed to be blind, regardless of race, religion, or creed. However, here in Manhattan, the scales of justice are weighed down by politics.
Democrat Jerry Nadler opened his remarks criticizing Republicans, accusing them of using this hearing to send a warning to Bragg following his charges against the former president.
Committee Republicans designed this hearing to intimidate and deter the duly elected district attorney of Manhattan from doing the work his constituents elected him to do.
Today's hearing comes just weeks after former President Trump was indicted by a grand jury in a Manhattan court for falsifying business records. That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
And we're back on Super Talk 997 WTN. Matt Bassett with Mac Maury in studio, and we are just waiting to get Senator Bill Hagerty on the line. We have a lot to cover with him. Oh, I see he is he's calling in right now. Give us just a sec. And we are on. I want to welcome in our Senator Bill Hagerty. Sir, how are you this morning?
Thank you.
Oh, wait, here we go. Senator?
Matt, how are you?
We are doing great. How are you?
Wonderful, wonderful. So good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again on what has been a very busy News Monday, but you had some news of your own this weekend. You want to tell us what that was about?
Well, this weekend we announced my endorsement of the 45th President of the United States to become the 47th President of the United States. You know, I was honored to serve in his administration as the United States Ambassador to Japan. I have been supporting him. I was the Tennessee chair for his victory campaign in 2016, and certainly worked very closely with him throughout the course of the first term. And if you think about where we are today, Matt, I think America is seeing a vast difference between where we were under President Trump's leadership and where we are today. You think about the loss of our stature as a nation. You think about the weakness of our economy, the collapse of our southern border, the fact that Afghanistan fell as it did, the fact that we're in, the full throes of a Cold War with China, and Russia has now invaded Ukraine. That would have never happened had President Trump been in office. And it's just,
it's
the American public is very, very hungry for strong leadership now.
I think we've seen two very divergent policies, one that put our country first, and the one that we are experiencing now that does not. So congratulations on your endorsement. Before we get into the big issues, though, I have to ask, I am getting information that you happen to play a round of golf with the president this weekend. Can you confirm or deny?
That's true. It's funny. I was telling him this, Matt, and I think it goes more to the fact I don't play golf enough. But I've played more golf with President Trump over the past 5 years than any other person. You think about how much we were involved when I was ambassador to Japan. Every time we got together with Prime Minister Abe, President Trump, I made sure we played a round of golf. One time, even 2 rounds of golf in the same day.
Well, I got to ask, not to interrupt, but what kind of golfer was President Abe?
Prime Minister Abe was a good golfer. He's a little bit more like me, though. We're not a single-digit handicap like President Trump. Now, I was with President Trump one day, and he shot par. I mean, he is a good athlete. And all of us have good days and bad days, but a good day for him is a par golf game. A bad day is a few points over par. Whereas for me, it can be a much more challenging number.
Yes. I got to say, I was saying earlier that I am a little green with envy, and I get these texts saying, "Hey, the president is playing with Kid Rock and John Daly. Are you the fourth?" And I have never had the privilege of playing with him. Now, I'm not going to use an ask for you to put a bug in his ear and say, just so you know, when you go to Nashville, that I'd love to host him.
We may be able to figure that out. And I tell you, John Daly was hitting the ball so long. Oh, it was unbelievable.
He is so cool. Well, did Kid Rock play?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
How was his game?
He's a good golfer.
Really?
He's got a good game. Yeah,
really?
Good game. Signature on the tee box, first hole with a cigar in his, between his teeth as he's teeing off. But no, he's got a good game.
Oh, well, great. And I spent the beginning of the show. You talked about the policy differences between this administration and President Trump's administration that we both served in, and it couldn't be any starker of a difference. And the thing that I spent a lot of time in my opening monologue talking about was the growing threat from China, and how across the globe, and I mean, you can literally spin it and just point to areas where our leadership has receded, and the Communist Chinese Party has stepped in to pick up the slack and then some. And I went into great detail about the threats that Taiwan is facing and how we have no credible deterrent at this point to keep them either from a blockade of the island or an outright invasion if the election does not, if they're not able to install their own puppet government this January. And I know that you have, and I covered Africa where they are outpacing us there, and I believe you had a recent trip to South America where they are moving in very aggressively. Can you talk globally about the China threat, and then we can drill down on some of the pieces?
Certainly, Matt. And I tell you, you've always been so perceptive about what China really is in terms of the threat that the Chinese Communist Party poses, not only to our allies in that region, but to the entire world. And to that point, South America is an area that is struggling very hard right now to work their respective economies out of a pandemic-induced recession. I mean, this pandemic that was unleashed by China around the world has had devastating effects on the economies all over the world. And I visited with the presidents of three countries. Went to Chile, to Uruguay, and then I went on my own to Colombia. I was there with other senators in the first two countries. But meeting with their presidents, it was very clear to me that they are doing their very best to try to emerge from this pandemic malaise. And it's not just the fact that their economies are suffering, but crime is through the roof in those countries, just like it has gone through the roof here in America. And one person said it to me very clearly, Matt, once a person has crossed that line and turned to crime, it's much easier for them to do it again and again and again. So they're dealing with the same sort of problem that we're dealing with in our cities, with escalating crime rates at the same time that they're trying to get their economy back together. And I hate to say this, but when we go to these countries, we're there with talking points. You know, our State Department's talking points are all about the existential climate crisis and how we need to put solar panels and windmills in place. These countries are trying to put food on the table, Matt. They're trying to fulfill the most basic needs of their society. And we're off message talking about, well, you can't do business with China because of their human rights records. Look, nobody's for, abusing other Americans, but how the Chinese treat the Uyghurs is not as important to these countries as what China or the United States or anybody else can do for them today in terms of economic engagement. We cannot create a void. We can't leave a void because China will step in. They are stepping in right now to do that in South America, in our own backyard.
Yeah, and when you look at our friends in Taiwan, I made the point that it is sad that Chairman McCall has to take a leadership position in galvanizing support among our friends there in Japan, where you served as ambassador and know the region better than almost anybody, and in Guam and in the Philippines. This is something the White House should be leading on. This is not something that is coming. It's something that's happening now, and they just seem to be asleep at the wheel.
Spending 10 days or whatever in Ireland on a family, history trip. I mean, that's just, that may be a nice thing to do under other circumstances, but the world is in tatters right now. A lot of it has to do with the fact that we've not demonstrated leadership in the White House. In fact, it's been the opposite. You think about what happened in Afghanistan. I mean, that set the pretext. Our weakness in Afghanistan, our timidity dealing with Vladimir Putin. You think about how Joe Biden has dealt with Putin. I mean, it's just a shame. We would basically let him have the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, even though it had been blocked. Biden turns around and gives it to him. The New START treaty that President Trump was not about to sign again until Russia brought the treaty up to cover them on a reciprocal basis. That treaty only covers about 45% of Russia's arsenal, 92% of our nuclear arsenal. Who would sign that deal? Joe Biden extended it for 5 years without a single change. And then when the Russian hackers hit the Colonial Pipeline here in America, no consequence whatsoever. So what Vladimir Putin sees in Joe Biden is an opportunity, weakness. And after Afghanistan, that's when they ramped up everything in the Ukraine border and moved in. what we're seeing right now, this instability in the Taiwan Strait, in Ukraine, what's happening in the Middle East, now in Africa, this is all part and parcel of demonstrated weakness by this administration. And Joe Biden is now over and goes over to Ireland and Northern Ireland to talk about his roots. Just so out of touch.
Yes, with the message to the American people and the world to be lick the world, which was a bizarre statement in and of itself. But I missed the days of foreign policy speeches when visiting other countries by the likes of Ronald Reagan or President Trump. Not what we saw this weekend.
No, you're exactly right. I don't even know how to respond to what happened this weekend. It's so unserious. And if you think about it, Matt, the world is watching this. China is watching this. Russia is watching this. The Ayatollahs are watching this. And what they're seeing is weakness and a lack of resolve. And what happens when that's obvious to them is they're going to step into that void, and they're going to press their own agenda further and further and further, oppressing more people and making the world a far more dangerous place. That's what we're getting, and that's the recipe that Joe Biden has brought together.
Yes, and it's there are not a lot of things that keep me up at night, but this is one that absolutely does. I mean, when we have so much going on in Ukraine with some strained resources on behalf of our military budget here. I mean, we've done war exercises as it relates to Taiwan, some of them showing that we would run out of ammunition within a week. How great are your concerns that we do not have the military footing to be able to handle these issues with a budget that, even though I pointed out that the budget is larger and larger every year, but it's misleading when you consider that at the height of the Cold War with Russia, we were spending 6% of the GDP towards these efforts, and now ours is at 3%. And when you factor in the fact that inflation is 5%, we have a budget footing militarily that's not even keeping up with inflation.
That's right. And if you think about the specific circumstance of Taiwan, and I know you've been tracking this, we're not even delivering on our commitments to Taiwan right now. The whole job has been the term they use to porcupine them, to make it extremely difficult, extremely costly to invade Taiwan. And we've got a backlog of $19, $20 billion of foreign military equipment that they're waiting to receive that we aren't delivering.
Which is worth pointing out, Senator, not to interrupt, but they have paid for.
Yeah. But we're not delivering it. We're not delivering it. We should be doing this. We should have learned our lesson in Ukraine. I advocated early on, start putting sanctions on Russia now. Give Vladimir Putin a taste of what's going to come. Don't wait till after he's already committed himself. Let him know we're serious. The Biden administration wouldn't do it. They were so nervous about, quote, escalating that they wound up getting exactly what I predicted. And we've got to learn from that mistake and make sure that we're doing everything we can to help Taiwan strengthen its position, to help increase the cost dramatically should anybody take an adverse action on that island, particularly the Chinese Communist Party. That's how we help our allies show strength. And this administration is again falling short in a big way.
Yeah, and just staying on the China topic for just a second, because another issue that is coming up now that we dealt with during the administration is as it relates to fentanyl. We know that the raw materials, the precursor chemicals that are used by all of these cartels to manufacture this, it comes from China. And I was not in the meeting, but was one person removed from hearing that we sat down with China and we told them, look, we know this is coming from you. We don't want to see this in Mexico because we know your fingerprints are on it. And as a result of those meetings, they stopped sending it. And today we have a situation where this is ramped up to an unprecedented extent. There's enough fentanyl that's crossed our southern border that, if ingested, would kill every man, woman, and child in this country. Yeah. And if we seize 35,000 pounds of it, which the administration is kind of proud of, it means 3 or 4 or 5 times of that has gotten through. But can you just talk a little bit about how China had the respect for us not to send it in the last administration, and now it is become just a boom industry that has become the leading cause of death of all Americans from 18 to 45?
Now, I think at least one of the meetings you're talking about, because I was on the phone with Larry Kudlow while it was happening. It was in Buenos Aires at the G20, and that was in 2018, where President Trump told Xi directly to stop sending fentanyl to the United States, and Xi agreed to do that. That was then in a different administration. We did show resolve, and we did show strength. And what we have right now is basically a war that's being waged on our youth. And we've talked about this. The number one killer of young people in America between the ages of 18 and 45 is drug overdose. And the majority of those overdoses are directly linked to fentanyl. The Chinese Communist Party's fingerprint is on every one of those deaths. It's murder, and it's happening every day. And this administration is leaving the southern border open. That pathway is clear. They will not even raise it with the Chinese Communist Party leadership. They won't even raise the issue of fentanyl. And it's killing our kids. It's just shocking to me.
Yeah, and I want to, give credit for this with a major caveat, but it came out this weekend that the Justice Department is charging 28 members of Mexico's Sinaloa cartel, and they're sanctioning 2 of the companies that they know that the fentanyl is coming from. But I'm not sure that is going to in any way slow or stop what we're seeing. Are you?
I'm not either. I mean, we're going to have to be very direct in this. We need to classify all these precursor chemicals. Matt, if you go online, and I don't want to tell people how to do it, but folks know how to. But you can purchase all the ingredient chemicals off of Snapchat, and it's just shocking how easy it's become. And the fact is, our law enforcement officers know this, but we're not empowering them to deal with it. And this is just a major problem that's got to be addressed. It's got to be taken seriously. But if we won't even control our southern border, then it's just it sort of all goes back to that: the lack of willingness, the lack of resolve. They're so interested in, quote, transforming America and gaining permanent one-party power that they're willing to sacrifice their youth to do it. It's sad, it's heartbreaking, but it's the truth.
Yeah, and it's one of these where we also don't see the Democratic Party. I mean, they don't want to take ownership of it because they know that the open border is the major contributor to it. But we also don't see them making any efforts to regulate fentanyl as we do Category 1 drugs like cocaine, methamphetamines, or heroin, because they are just so handheld by the woke elements of the party that doesn't want to have tougher sentences for any crimes.
Yeah, it's so sad, and you think about it, they just seem to keep getting it wrong. They look at the outcomes and say, well, if it's not, it doesn't 100% match the demographics of America, somehow there must be racism embedded in that. But what we need to be doing is trying to create an environment, one, where families can stay together and have a good job. 2, when somebody does violate the law and step across the line, that there are clear and serious penalties for doing that. I think you may have followed what was happening, Matt, in the District of Columbia, in the midst of one of the biggest crime waves that district has ever seen. The number of murders last year, over 200. It's 20% higher than that this year as of March. And you look at carjackings, they tripled over the past 3 years in the District of Columbia. Their woke city council wanted to actually reduce the penalties for all serious felonies in the district, lower the penalties, and allow every misdemeanor to get a trial, by jury, which would completely clog up the system, and it would mean that they would just go to catch and release in the district because the whole judicial system would have been overwhelmed. It is crazy to see that. I was able to block that and to stop it. Again, this is the federal District of Columbia, and Tennesseans should be able to come up there safely and visit, their capital. But that's, I think, part and parcel of this whole wokeness and dealing with the criminal justice system as though if you go easy on criminals, somehow that's going to be, that's going to be better for America and more fair. That's exactly the wrong lever to be pushing.
And they seem to be very touchy when Chairman Jim Jordan is in New York today, holding holding hearings and putting a spotlight on the fact that Americans from all over the country can't visit our major cities and feel safe.
No, it's terrible. Again, this crime wave has just manifested itself across the nation, and you've got these prosecutors, and now Prosecutor Bragg, who's spending all of his time bringing bogus charges against former President Trump when he's not doing anything to protect and defend the people of New York City or the visitors there. I think this is going to be a very stark contrast that Jim Jordan's going to bring. And I think the public's they are waking up to this. Certainly the people that live in these cities are moving out in droves. You see how many people are moving to Tennessee from these cities. If they can get out, they will. The people that are unfortunately trapped are suffering more and more and more, higher crime and more economic malaise.
Absolutely. And Senator, we've come to the end of our time, but I can't thank you enough for being so generous with your time with us and with our listeners. We always appreciate hearing from you and appreciate you doing our work up there. Thank you for being with us.
You're appreciated as well. Thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day. And we will be right back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
10:30 on the dot this Monday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Got some construction slowing things down on I-24 in Murfreesboro. About a 16-minute delay. You're down to one lane open, 24 eastbound at Joe B. Jackson Parkway. That's exit 84. It's backed up all the way to New Salem Highway. That's about a 4-mile backup. Full forecast in 2 minutes. Tennessee will invest more than $3 billion into roads in both urban and rural counties now that Governor Lee signed the Transportation Modernization Act. Some of that money will be used to explore the use of choice lanes by which commuters pay a fee to get to where they need to go faster. And President Biden says Congress needs to pass legislation that raises the debt limit without any conditions, but Republicans want to include spending cuts. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, speaking at the New York Stock Exchange today, says the national debt's ballooning.
Without exaggeration, American debt is a ticking time bomb that will detonate unless we take serious, responsible action.
And turning to sports, the Philadelphia Eagles and quarterback Jalen Hurts have reached agreement on a 5-year extension worth $255 million, $179 million guaranteed. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
A Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA. Which one should we do? A lot of people struggle over this particular decision. And I'll just give you a couple tools to figure out what might be better for you. Think about it this way. Let's say if I had $1,000 that I was thinking about investing, that was income, $1,000 of income. With an IRA, let's say that you're in a 30% tax bracket. Let's say there is such a thing. And you want to put this money in an IRA. You're going to save $300 in taxes. Now, if you go post-tax with like a Roth IRA, this is how much goes into the Roth IRA. Now, let's say that later on down the road, we have this money and it didn't grow at all, just to keep the math really simple. And let's say that at some point in the future, you're in a lower tax bracket, because the way our tax system works is that your first income is taxed at a really low rate, and then you get up into higher rates, 10%, 12%, 22%, and so on and so forth. It gets higher. If you're earning income and you're at that particular tax rate up there, you might want to avoid that tax rate right now and take the income at a later point in time when you're in a lower average tax rate. Now let's say that you're in a 10% bracket down here when you pull the money. How much are you going to pay in taxes? 10% of $1,000 is $100. How much do you get to spend? $900. Well, even though I didn't have growth, I had growth because of the difference between my tax rate here and here. And that's the idea. That's one of the things that we look at. We look at Social Security taxation, income taxation, and a lot of factors that might drive you in a higher or lower brackets in the future. If you want to learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call or call 615-851-1950.
And we're back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. I am Matt Bassett, and in the studio with me is Mac Morey. Always appreciative when Senator Hagerty takes the time to visit with us, and a lot of news there. And what I'd like to do is open up the phone lines. We want to hear from you. Most of you know the WTN hotline, 615-737-9986. That's 737 WWTN. Please let us know what you're thinking on any of these topics, from China to the border to fentanyl to the presidential race. Anything you want to weigh in on, we would love to hear from you. And as we're waiting for callers to jump on and weigh in, we'll cover a couple news stories that are coming up. So as we see that President Biden is not addressing a myriad of critical issues facing the country, there are governors that are stepping up to fill the void. And I want to give a shout out to former Trump press secretary, now Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who is having a tremendous first 100 days as the governor of Arkansas down there. We talked about fentanyl and dealing with it, and you can talk about it or you can pass laws that address it. And she recently signed into law the Arkansas Death by Delivery Act. And this one has real teeth to it. Anyone who knowingly delivers fentanyl to a person and the person dies as a result of taking the drug will face a sentence of between 20 and 60 years or life in prison, the opposite of woke justice. And she has also extended the death by delivery sentences to those who are also distributing and trafficking in methamphetamines, heroin, or cocaine. So you punish behaviors that you don't like, or you go woke, as our big cities have, where shoplifters are just they're booked, and then they're right back out on the street committing the same crimes. There's a clear choice, and there's a way to deal with that here. In addition to taking on the tougher sentencing, she also passed the social media bill, where it requires parental consent for any new user of social media under 18 years old. We've all seen the results of social media on our youth. It produces anxiety, depression, ridiculously high suicide rates. And it's something I'm glad to see somebody is finally taking. She also took teacher pay from being 48th in the nation in Arkansas to being the one of the top 5 in the country, a $50,000 minimum for starting school teachers. And she pointed out this weekend in interviews that when it comes to drug sentencing and a host of other Democratic priorities, that the Democratic priority is more about building their voter base than it is about protecting our country. Additionally, in the first 100 days, she addressed the China threat to the extent that a state governor can. She banned TikTok on government devices, banned Chinese drones in Arkansas airspace, and banned the purchase of land by companies with majority ownership in the Chinese government. So again, governors are stepping up to deal with this in ways that our federal government is not. And Mac, I see we have a caller on the line, John from Dixon. John, I want to welcome you to the program. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I am great, sir. Thanks for calling in. What's on your mind?
Well, I just wondered why the Republicans or the conservative Republicans don't get some backbone and fight back the left on all these situations that we have. You know, they just seem like they're not doing anything.
Well, I think, I mean, I share your frustration that more is not getting done. But I do think some of the leaders in the House, which was one of the lone bright spots of the midterm elections, as you know, are fighting back. I mean, Jim Jordan is on the ground in New York City today holding hearings on their out-of-control crime, and the left really does not appreciate that. So I think you're seeing individual people using their chairmanships to do what they can, and with Chairman McCall leading the bipartisan delegation to Taiwan, and we wouldn't even be talking about these issues if it wasn't for him or Speaker McCarthy. So do you think that some good stuff is going on?
Well, I mean, I hear what you're talking about. It's just maybe things like the border too. I mean,
yeah,
that's a biggie, you know.
Yeah, and you are spot on that, and it is actually the issue, John, that started me doing commentary on Fox News before I was working with the great folks at the station here at Super Talk, because it's one of those things where almost everything that Biden did can be undone, with the exception, the glaring exception of the border. And I thought that a lot of the things that when he said he was going to undo the Trump policies on the border, I thought that was more campaign rhetoric. But sure enough, he took the most secure border that we have had in over 30 years and just completely destroyed it. All he had to do was nothing. But the president couldn't even get that done right. And now at this point, we have had 15 million people ignore our Constitution, ignore our laws, and simply walk into the continental United States. And if that wasn't bad enough, he's using our tax dollars to bus and fly them all over the country. And I think, to your point, and correct me if you don't agree, but once they're here, that becomes a problem for the next administration that is almost impossible to undo. And it is unbelievably frustrating to me that there hasn't been more of a call for change on this.
Well, I know one thing. I know that the American people better wake up in 2024 because our country needs to be changed.
Amen. Amen.
I mean,
we got to get it right next time, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Well, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the Republican candidates trying to get to get the nomination?
Well, I know Trump is leading as far as the polls, but I don't go by the polls much.
Sure.
But I like Trump. I don't care about his character. I know what he did when he was in office. I know he cares a lot about the country. He's a patriot. Otherwise, why would he be going through all this if he didn't care about the country?
Because I think to your point, he doesn't need it.
Yeah, I know. He doesn't need to go through all this purgatory. I mean, so I believe, I like DeSantis, but I don't know. I'm leaning toward Trump. I think he can change. I think he can do a good job. He's elected.
Yeah, I do too, and I know a lot of our listeners support former President Trump. A lot of them like DeSantis. Mike Pompeo's not running. You've got Nikki Haley. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy. I think I'm saying his name correctly. Who is a great guy, but I just keep coming back to, why would you hope that someone else would govern as a conservative when Trump did it? And right. He's going to do it again. And to me, the more the left goes apoplectic and says, well, you can have anybody you want, but you can't have this guy again, the more it makes me want him to get it and to have a successful second term.
Well, I really don't believe Biden's going to run. I mean,
How can he? How can he?
He can't. He's, I mean, and then we got Kamala Harris. My God, that would be a complete disaster.
Oh, but would you not love that matchup? I mean, Trump versus Kamala Harris. I mean, she polls right up there with the coronavirus.
Yeah.
I would take that match any day and twice on Sunday.
Yeah, she's a real winner, I'll tell you. Boy.
Yeah, well, John, thank you so much for calling in, and thanks for spending some time with us.
Yeah, and thank you.
Thank you, sir. And just to remind folks, the phone lines are open. If there's something you're hearing, something else you want to weigh in on, please do so. We're going to do a quick commercial break, and we will be right back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
explain?
Tennessee will now invest more than $3 billion into roads to ease traffic congestion. And Jalen Hurts is the highest paid player in the NFL ever. We'll tell you about it coming up at 11 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
And we're back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. This is Matt Bassett, and we are taking your calls. I want to let folks know, because we've had a lot of callers, that I will open the phone lines back up after we hear from State Senator Jack Johnson at the top of the hour. So after 11:35, we will take your calls as well. But I want to go to David in Smyrna, who I think has some comments on the presidential race. David, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, and welcome to WTN. Glad you're part of the family.
Thank you. Very, very excited to be here. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. What's on your mind?
Well, I will freely admit that I was one of those conservatives who was very dubious of Trump the first time around. I was a Cruz guy, and I had a lot of trouble believing that Trump was just going to leave his old Democrat ways, check that at the door. Obviously, history proved me wrong, and I think my thing with Trump is that, and I think a lot of people might agree with me, it's a style versus substance thing.
Sure.
I like the substance. I despise the style. I don't despise the fact that he's never afraid to kind of give it back to the media, if you will. He didn't roll over and take their narrative and just okay. But however, with DeSantis, I see somebody like Trump, but without the bombast or the propensity for the foot in mouth moments. And
yes,
and that's why again DeSantis will be my guy in the primary, and if Trump winds up being the nominee, yes, I will more than happily vote for him. I was dubious of Trump to the point that it took me listening to the late great Phil Valentine on election night. About an hour before the polls closed, and I was like, you know what, I think I'm just going to go hold my nose and vote for this guy because of the Supreme Court was basically the catalyst for my vote for him. And again, like I said, I wound up being pleasantly surprised, but DeSantis, I think, is, like I said, he's Trump minus the bull in the China shop factor.
Yeah. Well, we hope so, right?
Yeah. you never know until the rubber hits the road. But he doesn't seem to have that propensity for, like I said, the foot and mouth problem, and he's not quite he's got the stones. He's a tough guy and he doesn't roll over for the media, but it's not quite as, I don't know what adversarial as maybe the word is. Like he's one of those people where he can just flay you alive and just do it with a smile on his face, and by the time he's doing it, you're like, well, what the hell happened to me? Did I just get insulted? That's kind of DeSantis' style, and that's kind of what I like about the guy.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I'm with you there. He's done a fantastic job governing my home state of Florida. He had a blowout victory there, and I don't think there's a tremendous policy difference. It's I think you hit the nail on the head. It is a style thing and how you put yourself out there.
Exactly. Yeah, like I look at, unfortunately, like during 2016, my dark horse guy was Scott Walker. I looked at Scott Walker. I saw a guy who governed Wisconsin as a Reagan conservative. And
yes, he did.
Survive a recall election. And I think whoever Scott Walker's campaign advisors were probably should never work in politics again. But DeSantis kind of reminds me a little bit of Scott Walker, albeit more successful.
Yes. And it will be interesting to watch play out. David, thanks so much for joining us. I hope to hear from you again. And we are going to do a short commercial break, and after we will be back with State Senator Jack Johnson. Stay with us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
$11 o'clock on the dot this Monday morning. I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. Going to be breezy today, but sunny. Going to be warmer each day this week. Full forecast coming up in 2 minutes. Tennessee will invest more than $3 billion into roads to ease traffic congestion. Now that Governor Lee has signed the Transportation Modernization Act into law, part of that money goes to explore the use of choice lanes, which commuters could use to get places faster if they pay a fee. President Biden says Congress needs to pass legislation that raises the debt limit without other conditions, but Republicans want spending cuts. Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy at the New York Stock Exchange today said a meeting in February failed to produce any results.
I have not heard from the White House since our very first meeting. President Biden has been missing in action and misleading the public. Mr. President, with all due respect, enough is enough.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warning that a U.S. default would tank the economy. There's no firm date on when that would happen, but some economists believe it could happen at some point over the summer. Better luck next time. Jim Ryan says a test of the world's largest rocket is on hold.
The clock was ticking down to liftoff when a pressurization issue with the Super Heavy rocket signaled that the launch from the SpaceX facility in South Texas wouldn't happen today. The countdown did continue to allow other procedures to be tested, but the clock stopped at T-minus 10 seconds. They'll try again on Wednesday to launch an uncrewed vehicle into space for a single trip around the Earth.
Yeah, NASA plans to use that rocket to land on the moon in 2025. Turning to sports, Jalen Hurts is now the highest paid player in NFL history with a record extension with the Eagles. 5 years, $255 million, $179 million guaranteed. That's the latest news. Weather's next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
And we're back. This is Matt Bassett with you. Thrilled to be with you. Good morning to all of Nashville. Thanks for being with us. And I would like to welcome on into the program my senator, State Senator Jack Johnson. Senator, how are you?
I'm great, Matt. Good to be back with you. Hope you're having a good day.
I'm having a great day. I am better than I deserve. And I know that you have a very busy week as you all are looking to wrap up what has been, I think, charitably a very eventful session.
I think that is charitable. It has been eventful.
But besides the national media invading us and trying to take over the narrative, there's some tremendous work actually being done by you and other members of the legislature and our governor. Can you kind of just tell us kind of where we are as we're looking to wrap up as you're looking to wrap up the session?
Sure, Matt, and I appreciate you acknowledging that. And it's one of the disappointing aspects of this particular legislative session. There has been a lot of noise, a lot of distractions going on that sadly has taken a lot of attention away from what I believe to be some very, very good work that we've done. Of course, we started the session off with my Senate Bill 1, which prohibits now transgender surgeries on minor children, irreversible procedures. That was, I think, a very important legislative accomplishment. And then
yes,
my
and
Senate
thank you for your leadership on that.
Well, it's sad that we even had to take up that particular issue, but we did, and then we passed Senate Bill 3, which prohibits adult-themed entertainment, sexually explicit entertainment in front of kids. That was an important bill. It was controversial. It shouldn't have been with some on the left, but I don't know why they would have an issue with legislation that just says, hey, you can't do these things that are sexually explicit in front of children. But we got that done, and then a bill that I don't think we talked about last time, but I'm very proud of, is one that was brought to me by our state treasurer relative to what is known as ESG, or environmental social governance. And it basically, it was brought to us by our treasurer, but he wanted to make sure it was in statute to make sure that our state treasurer now and into perpetuity will make no investment decisions regarding relative to state tax dollars and trust, endowments, pensions, all the money that our state treasurer manages. ESG will not be a factor in that. As you know, there's a significant effort by some on the left to try to affect social policy via access to capital, and we have to stand up against that. And I think Tennessee is a real leader in doing that. And then of course school safety, which sadly due to the horrific events at Covenant School has become a bigger issue. The governor introduced a comprehensive school safety bill back in January that has been making its way through the system, but very proud. Over $200 million that will go into hiring school resource officers and giving money to schools to be able to harden their facilities.
Yeah, and that is the issue that I think voters across the state wanted you to address. And I think the governor has done a tremendous job, even before the tragedy, in recognizing that steps had to be taken to make sure that all of our children, our most precious asset, were as safe as they could possibly be, and doing things to ensure that both public and private schools had the same level of security when children go there to learn.
Absolutely. We want our parents to know that their kids are safe when they get dropped off at school. And we have some schools and some districts in Tennessee do a really good job with this. Some don't quite have the resources necessary to be able to do some things. And that's why, again, I'm just proud that the governor proposed and the General Assembly overwhelmingly supported a lot of money, but also a consistent safety plan across the state for all of our schools.
And is that something that you see being signed into law in the very near future?
I do. Two aspects of it. One was the actual legislation that put safety protocols in place that must be consistent relative to locked doors and access to schools. And then from a budgetary standpoint, appropriating money to not only make sure we have an SRO, a school resource officer in every school, but also a Homeland Security agent in all 95 counties, at least one in all 95 counties, to coordinate with schools, local law enforcement, to make sure that safety protocols are being followed. So again, very comprehensive bill, and yes, it's funded. It's in the budget. We expect, by the way, to have the budget up in committee for the next fiscal year tomorrow, and then hopefully get to pass it on the floor on Wednesday.
Great. And just logistically, do you expect that this session will in fact wrap up this week?
I do. We have mapped out a schedule for this week, both the House and the Senate, with a projected adjournment date of Friday. We've got a lot of work to do, but yes, we can get that done and adjourn on Friday. We have told our members, which we sometimes do, pack an extra set of clothes just in the event if we need to spill over into Saturday, just to wrap up any loose ends. But I think we can finish by Friday and get back home to our districts and again. Start talking to our constituents about some of the good things that we've accomplished this year.
Well, I got to say, you guys in the legislature have a very good reputation in Tennessee of finishing the work and getting it done on time, which I hope that you appreciate is not the case in a number of our state capitals across the country, despite their best efforts.
Well, you're exactly right, and I tell people we are a truly part-time citizen legislature.
Mm-hmm.
Most every member of the General Assembly, Senate and House, has another job. This is not our job. We don't do this full-time. We do get paid a relatively small amount of money to do this, but if you're like me, I've got 2 kids in college, and I'm not going to live on a state senator's salary. So most of us own businesses or we have other occupations. And I agree with you, Matt. It's a very effective way to govern because we come up, we do the people's business, we get it done in a reasonable amount of time, and then we go home. We go home back to our families and our jobs and our communities and our constituents. And I think that's better. And by the way, I think that's the way the framers really intended for our federal government to work as well. We've gotten far away from that, and certainly serving in Congress and the United States Senate is more of a year-round full-time job. And I do always like to point out, you mentioned the contrast between some other states. California has a full-time state legislature. Tennessee does not, and I think I would choose Tennessee over California any day of the week.
Yes, and that's why I'm always thankful that I get to live in Middle Tennessee. Now, in addition to all the work that you've done in protecting our children, which I am personally very appreciative of, having a 12-year-old that is in the 6th grade. And I don't know why it's ever controversial that we protect our children from any influencing things that they just don't need to be dealing with at that age. I wanted to get your opinion on the White House and their constant use of executive orders to try and upend some of the things that we have put in place, both on the high school level and in the collegiate level as it relates to women's sports. You've probably seen the White House came out with this draft proposal that was really pushing this transgender agenda as it related to women's sports. And if finalized, and if it became the law of the land, would have a tremendous detrimental effect to women's sports in the state of Tennessee. Now, your staff has actually gotten me briefed on the issue, on all the laws that we have in place in Tennessee that we wisely put in place early, that protect high school sports, that protect college sports. But how nervous are you when you watch the efforts on behalf of this White House to really try and blow up women's sports?
Well, it's here we go again, right, as the old expression goes. And time again, we've seen this from the Biden administration, to where they try via executive order to subvert state sovereignty, to subvert the 10th Amendment, which empowers states to make decisions relative to this. And here's the irony, Matt, is that, Title IX was put in place back years ago to protect women's sports. And now the Biden administration has issued rules that would subvert laws that we have passed, which you mentioned. We've passed legislation in Tennessee to say if you're a biological male, you cannot participate in women's sports. Period. And at the high school level as well as the college level. And that is good public policy, and it is widely supported by the vast majority of Tennesseans. So now you have a president issuing an executive order to try to subvert that, to try to subvert the will of the people of Tennessee via their elected representatives, and to say, no, you can't have a blanket policy that says no biological males can participate in women's sports. We have that in Tennessee. We have an across-the-board ban on that. If you're a biological male, no matter how you might identify, you cannot compete in women's sports. And that is good public policy. The Biden administration is trying through the U.S. Department of Education, which, by the way, should be dissolved. There is no role for the federal government in education.
Agreed.
That's another story for another day. But through the U.S. Department of Education to subvert that and say that you can't have a blanket policy prohibiting biological men from competing in women's sports. So it's just another example. I can give you many, many, whether it was COVID vaccine mandates, the shutdowns, things that the Biden administration has tried to do via executive order that are completely contradictory to the will of the people of Tennessee via their elected representatives.
Well, and you make the point of how proactive Tennessee was seeing this coming. And I just want folks to realize that about half of the legislatures across this country have passed similar laws. So it's not like the White House is just coming after us. They are threatening to undo the duly passed laws of about half of the country.
Exactly.
That is weighed in on this, and there are a myriad of other states that are weighing in on it now. And as I looked at the rule, first of all, what they're doing, it's almost like the White House comes up with something daily that would make conservatives' people's heads explode. It seems like a strategy on that part. And I tell people not to get too excited and to take the bait, because this will all have to work its way up to our Supreme Court eventually. And we saw the case in West Virginia where the Supreme Court did not hear the case. That doesn't mean that they would rule against them if the case had gotten there. But as we're watching this play out, and as I looked at this rule, proposed rule, which is insane on its face, but then it says that they could do serious damage as far as withholding federal funds from universities and colleges across Tennessee, not to mention the problems it would cause in high school. But what I found was the most infuriating thing about this is they weren't even consistent in this rule and said that colleges and high schools could make a determination. They didn't have to apply this to all sports, and they could potentially exclude very competitive sports. I mean, what does that even mean? And what does it say to our young women who are working hard to compete in a variety of sports that then the president of a college or a high school principal would have to go in as an administrator and make these decisions on what sports really matter?
Right. Well, and you're exactly right. For young ladies in Tennessee that work hard, they train, they prepare, they want to compete in high school athletics, possibly college athletics. Yeah, just think about how disjointed this is. There's no predictability, and that's why we wanted to create predictability in Tennessee by passing blanket bans across the board. And I will say this, Matt, the Constitution does not seem to matter to the Biden administration sometimes.
No, it does
when
not.
they issue some of these things. I am confident that this proposed rule through the Department of Education will be challenged. I don't speak for our Attorney General, but there will certainly be calls from the Tennessee General Assembly, including myself, to our Attorney General, who does an amazing job, Jonathan Skrmetti, to litigate this, to join with other states and take this to court. I can't imagine that if this made its way through the court system, that it would be upheld. That doesn't seem to be of importance to the Biden administration, but it's ridiculous that they would even propose something so preposterous. And again, I want to say something else, and I really applaud our Speaker of the House, Cameron Sexton, and others, and I'm certainly involved in this, in disconnecting us from the U.S. Department of Education. We do get money, all states do, through the U.S. Department of Education, and it's high time we in Tennessee said, keep that money. We don't want the federal government having any role whatsoever in education in the state of Tennessee. I think that this action, this unconstitutional action from the Biden White House, is just going to add fuel to that fire and encourage us to even act more expeditiously relative to separating ourselves from the federal government when it comes to education.
Well, amen. And I can't thank you for your leadership on this issue enough. Senator, we have to do a quick commercial break. If you could just stay with us for a moment, can I ask you to do that?
I'd be happy to. Thanks, Matt.
And we will be right back with you on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy says a vote is coming soon on a bill that reins in spending without touching Social Security or Medicare. We'll tell you about it at 11:30 on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
And we're back on Super Talk, continuing with our coverage with my favorite state senator, because he is my state senator, Jack Johnson. Senator, thanks for staying with us.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that.
Well, you know, we covered what I wanted to cover, which was the critical business as it relates to your constituents and the people of Tennessee. But as we alluded to earlier, there was a lot of noise this session, and we were thrust into the national spotlight or the national media in a way that I think many of us as Tennesseans certainly didn't appreciate. And as it related to the Gang of Three, I find it interesting that now even many on the left are starting to turn on them a bit. Dan Mandis covered this earlier in his program, but Bill Maher, not exactly a voice for conservatives, but I describe him as a classic liberal Democrat. And that's his own words. That's how he describes himself. But he made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have the audio right in front of me, but basically said, grabbing bullhorns and behaving in this manner is what you do perhaps when you're running for office, but you're already in there. You should be doing the people's work and passing legislation or voicing your concerns on legislation, because now you're part of the legislative process. And as we've watched this kind of play out, I think there's a lot of frustration that the national media injected race into this when race was never part of the issue of any of this, but they took that narrative and decided to run with it anyway. I think as the dust is settling, people see this for kind of what it was. And what frustrates me the most is it was a hijacking of dealing with a tragedy and keeping our children safe, and the national media tried to morph that into something else. So as the session is coming to a close, what are your thoughts on this? What are your closing thoughts, kind of lessons learned?
Well, I think your assessment of it, Matt, is completely spot on. You had three individuals who chose to make everything about themselves, not about the people of Tennessee, not about the victims of a horrific shooting at Covenant School, not about the people's business that we try to conduct here when we're in session in the General Assembly. You had three people that wanted to make themselves the center of attention. And they did that by taking control of the House floor, encouraging people to storm the chamber and try to take over the chamber. We all know what they did with the bullhorn and everything else. And as long as I've been in the Senate, and certainly I've been an observer long before that of state government and even federal government, and I've never seen an instance like that where three people were so arrogant and conceited that they felt that they had the right, that they were led to literally shut down the proceedings of the House of Representatives in order to make themselves the center of attention. And I can tell you in Williamson County, and I hear from people all over the state, that it was not well received. And then I think the overwhelming majority, vast majority of Tennesseans thought that it was embarrassing, that it was a poor reflection on the state for them to take that level of action. So again, I'm very careful not to weigh in on House matters, and I've been careful not to weigh in relative to expulsion or reseating them and that type of thing. But I am comfortable in telling you that what those three people did was an embarrassment to the state of Tennessee, and I think that the overwhelming majority of our fellow Tennesseans see it the same way.
I think you're right, and I'm curious, and I've had a lot of super texters ask. I think there's growing frustration that you all took the move to expel these members, and now they're back. And are there any efforts, or is there any talk amongst your colleagues about looking at that so that that when you take the time to expel someone in the future, they can't come and rejoin the assembly?
Well, I think that the House is having that conversation, and rightfully so, because the expulsion took place in the House. I serve in the Senate. Although it from a historical standpoint, some of your listeners may not be aware or may not remember that we in the Senate, we expelled a member of the Senate just over a year ago. It was a Democrat from Memphis, but she had been convicted of a felony, and when you are a convicted felon, you are ineligible to serve in the General Assembly. And upon her conviction, she refused to resign. So we went through that same exercise in the Senate. So again, I think that members, we're all going to wrap up here in the next few days, and we'll get back home to our districts. And that's one of my favorite times, because I really enjoy getting out in the district and talking to my constituents and talking to various groups. doing basically a session recap of everything that we accomplished and things that we worked on this particular year. And as I'm starting to do that, I'm starting to hear from constituents that just really focus on the fact that what they did was an embarrassment. And so, regardless of what we decide to do moving forward relative to expulsion of members, I hope that it sends a very clear message to all members of the General Assembly that what those three individuals did was highly inappropriate and was very embarrassing for the state of Tennessee.
Yeah, well, amen. And as we talk about the state versus the local, were you as frustrated with me when we decided, or our Nashville Metro decided to pass on the Republican convention? I got to say that offended me as a broadcaster, but it also greatly offended me as someone who supports our local businesses, that decision cost billions of dollars. And before we ended, I wanted to thank you for holding them to account for some of those actions that just aren't in the best interest of anyone in the state.
No, they injected politics, and I'm always clear to say, had it been the Democratic National Convention and they were interested in having that in Nashville, I would have been 1,000% supportive. I wouldn't have attended, but I would have been very supportive of that coming. And for liberal Democrats in Nashville serving on the Metro Council to pass on, I refer to it as the mother of all conventions, because it happens every 4 years. The eyes of the world are on your city and your state, and for them to pass on it for purely political partisan reasons was an embarrassment for the state, and again, cost businesses, cost hotels, restaurants, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that could have come to Tennessee. So very disappointed in them for doing it, and yes, and I was very supportive of the bill to cap the size of the Metro Council.
Well, Senator, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for all the tremendous work that you and the other legislators have done during this session. I wish you Godspeed in wrapping it up, and I do hope you can enjoy life a little bit when your service is at least done for the year from a legislative standpoint. So thanks so much, Senator.
Thank you, Matt. Always great to be on with you. Have a great rest of the day.
Great to have you. You too, sir. And we will be right back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.
I'm Ken Weaver with your top stories. We have got 3 days in a row of almost nothing but sunshine. Maybe a cloud here or there, but mostly sunny days, starry nights. Full forecast in 2 minutes. Governor Lee has signed a bill into law this morning, providing more than $3 billion to ease traffic congestion. The Transportation Modernization Act invests in roads in every part of the state. It includes money to explore choice lanes where drivers pay a fee to use to get where they're going faster. President Biden says Congress needs to pass legislation raising the debt limit without conditions, but Republicans want spending cuts. And Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy says a vote is coming soon to do just that.
In the coming weeks, the House will vote on a bill to lift the debt ceiling into the next year. Save taxpayers trillions of dollars, make us less dependent upon China, curb our high inflation, all without touching Social Security and Medicare.
That's the latest news. Weather is next. I'm Ken Weaver, WTN News.
A Roth IRA versus a traditional IRA. Which one should we do? A lot of people struggle over this particular decision. And I'll just give you a couple tools to figure out what might be better for you. Think about it this way. Let's say if I had $1,000 that I was thinking about investing, that was income, $1,000 of income. With an IRA, let's say that you're in a 30% tax bracket. Let's say there is such a thing. And you want to put this money in an IRA. You're going to save $300 in taxes. Now, if you go post-tax with like a Roth IRA, this is how much goes into the Roth IRA. Now, let's say that later on down the road, we have this money and it didn't grow at all, just to keep the math really simple. And let's say that at some point in the future, you're in a lower tax bracket, because the way our tax system works is that your first income is taxed at a really low rate, and then you get up into higher rates, 10%, 12%, 22%, and so on and so forth. It gets higher. If you're earning income and you're at that particular tax rate up there, you might want to avoid that tax rate right now and take the income at a later point in time when you're in a lower average tax rate. Now let's say that you're in a 10% bracket down here when you pull the money. How much are you going to pay in taxes? 10% of $1,000 is $100. How much do you get to spend? $900. Well, even though I didn't have growth, I had growth because of the difference between my tax rate here and here. And that's the idea. That's one of the things that we look at. We look at Social Security taxation, income taxation, and a lot of factors that might drive you into higher or lower brackets in the future. If you want to learn more about our approach to investing and financial planning, go to paulwinkler.com and set up a free 15-minute phone call or call 615-851-1950.
And we're back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. This is Matt Bassett. And I want to let our callers know that in just a few minutes I'm going to open up the phone lines again because we had a large volume of folks who wanted to say and weigh in on some of the topics that we have covered. And that number is 615-737-9986, 737-WWTN. So would love to hear from you. Some cleanup on the super text line. Is it related to our story on Supreme Court justices being relentlessly targeted and harassed from the left from our first hour with Mark Paoletta, Steve from Lebanon? To quote the late, great Phil Valentine, the left is all about diversity except when it comes to diversity of thought. Could not have said that better myself, Steve. And let's see, another super texter. Can you comment on the leaker? Yes. In fact, let's go ahead and do that now. So many people have been following the news where former Massachusetts National Guardsman Jack Teixeira was arrested last week for some pretty serious leaks, and it brings up a host of issues and questions we need to ask, and we have to overhaul this whole process about just who has access and how many people have access to classified data in this country. When I was serving, I had a TS SCI clearance, which is top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. And what was surprising to me was to learn the number of people in our country serving in government jobs that have access to this. People were putting that number at close to 1 million people. Well, if it's that top secret, I'm not sure 1 million people need to know it. And as it relates to this young man who has, for all practical purposes, at 21 years old, ruined his life because he wanted to share this information and look cool to people in a gaming chat room, it just brings up a lot of questions. The first of which to me was there are different levels of access, but how this guy had access to finished products of the Joint Chief of Staff or CIA's Operations Center is beyond me. And then the fact that he could go into a SCIF, which is a sensitive compartmented information facility, and take pictures of this information or put it on a thumb drive and leave with it. I mean, none of this is supposed to happen this way. When I went in and got my briefings every Monday morning, I had to put every cell phone that I had into a secure compartment. None of that is supposed to be allowed in these facilities. And I'm watching the coverage of the people at the Pentagon saying, well, we have processes and protocols in place. And they said it over and over again. But clearly, the process and protocols did not work at all. And it just is amazing to me. So, how did he get such a large volume of information without being detected? And, look, he didn't even our intelligence community weren't even the ones who caught this. It was the media that caught it. So clearly their policies and protocols are going to have to be reviewed and revamped. And there was a lot of damaging information that came out from this. A lot of it we won't know. We don't know how much stuff is going to continue to be leaked. Some of it you could have filed under duh, like when he pointed out that, as we covered extensively earlier, that Taiwan is unlikely to thwart Chinese military air superiority in a cross-strait conflict, while tactics such as China's use of civilian ships for military purposes have eroded, and the U.S. spy agency's ability to detect a pending invasion, according to these leaked documents. Now, anybody with a globe could see that Taiwan has no chance by themselves of defending themselves. You look at the geographic size of China and the little tiny island that is Taiwan. It's like if the state of Florida decided to go after Key West. It's not much of a fight as it relates to this. But other things came out that was damaging. And one of the things that I found interesting as it related to these spy balloons, remember the president telling us that, there was really nothing to be concerned about here, and, a balloon invading our airspace was just not that big of a deal. That was beyond false. And it turns out that there were 4 additional balloons that were circumventing the globe from December 2021 to May 2022. And I think we almost do a disservice when we call these things balloons, because that's not what China calls them. China refers to them as espionage spy airships. These are not simply balloons. They are capable of generating 10,000 watts of electricity. They have sophisticated cameras. They have sophisticated radar, and they have been able to gather huge sums of information from sensitive sites like our air bases. They're able to make them do a figure 8 to make sure they got all of the information they wanted and to see what was based where. This was an enormous problem. And, as it relates to this leaker, the big problem is that it puts in jeopardy our intelligence assets that are in the field. And this is where Merrick Garland came out, our Attorney General, and said that, he faced up to 15 years in prison. I think that's sugarcoating it a little bit. He mentioned he could get 10 years for the first charge and an additional 5 years for the next. But that's not really the case. That's the minimum that this kid is facing. If it turns out that, and it's the 1917 Espionage Act that he would be charged under for that, if it turns out that our assets in the field, if somebody gets killed because of this information, he could get capital punishment for this and faces being in a FedMax penitentiary where you're not allowed to talk to anybody for the rest of your life. Security clearance is a big deal, and we have to make a determination of why this young man who served as a technician, did he really need this information to do his job as a tech? But when you're talking about reading from this Political article, the evidence may be so clear that Pentagon's file leaker Jack Teixeira's guilty sentence is just a matter of time, but the scope of punishment depends on how damaging the leak proved to be, meaning that nothing is off the table, including the death penalty. And I can envision multiple factual scenarios where the government then asks for capital punishment. This is something that we simply have to get a handle on, and we have to revamp how we do this. Rebecca Kofer, former National Defense Intelligence Officer, claimed that the disclosure could have a destructive impact on our ability to collect intelligence. She says, quote, "It takes years to recruit human sources who are willing to betray their country and steal secrets from his or her government and provide them to the United States," she explained. "It takes years and billions of dollars to map out access to adversarial or allied network systems in order to intervene in their communications. Now, some of these sources and channels will be patched up, closed, and unusable by U.S. spy agencies, and a massive amount of taxpayers' money will be wasted," she added. Overall, the impact of this leak is disastrous. But President Biden wasn't super concerned about it, as he wasn't super concerned about the balloons. And even when he took the initiative to shoot it down, he did it over water, greatly degrading our ability to figure out what was on it. This is just one example after the other where they say one thing, but the facts are actually something completely different. We need to get a handle on it, and we need to get a handle on it now. We're going to do a quick commercial break, and hold on. We have Melissa on the line. I'd like to welcome on into the program, Melissa. Melissa, how are you?
Hi. I'm good. How are you?
Thanks so much for joining us. What's on your mind?
Well, I had mixed feelings about this leaker. One side of me is really proud of this young man because he told the truth. We know what's going on in Ukraine. We know what's going on with Russia. We know more about what's going on with China. And he told the truth. The source, the way he got busted, it wasn't the government. It was the media.
Yes, and I made that point.
Hates when the truth comes out. They hate it. And they're going to find who this is. They were determined, absolutely determined, that they didn't want the truth coming out because it makes them liars too. And I think it was very brave of this young man. Very brave of his dad too, because I believe his dad knew the whole time what he was doing, because he was very vocal in his support of this young man. Now, I hate that lives may have been put in danger. I really do. I hate that.
Well, and that's the rub, right?
Yes, that's the rub. But I'm tired of being rubbed the wrong way by the mainstream media. It's been going on for 40 years now in this country, that they've established themselves, and they are such a mouthpiece for misinformation, disinformation, and just plain outright lies.
Well,
and
can I Yeah, I want to take that point and move it forward because there's obviously concern about this, but there still has been no comprehensive coverage from the media on the fact that the Hunter Biden laptop story had 50 members of our intelligence community, including two former heads of the CIA in Clapper and Brennan, that said it was a Russian hoax. Where is the accountability there?
Yes, where is the accountability? You won't find it. You won't find it as long as the Democrats are in charge.
Yes. Well, I certainly agree with that. And Melissa, thank you so much for your call. I hope you'll call again, and we will be right back after a short commercial break on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. And we're back on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. I am Matt Bassett. Thank you for being with us all morning. I want to thank our tremendous guests, Mark Paoletta, Senator Bill Hagerty, and State Senator Jack Johnson for being with us. And we are coming to the end of our time, but I am thrilled to have with us in studio Pamela Furr, who will be filling in for Matt Murphy today.
That is correct. Yep.
And Matt Murphy will be filling in for Brian Wilson.
That is correct. We're at day off season. So yeah, Brian's off today. So we're all kind of switching around. But good to see you.
Good to see you.
Where's your golf clubs?
Not in this car, unfortunately. And boy, we have had some tremendous weather here.
Yeah.
I'm constantly reminded that the spring and the fall are some of the just best times to be in Middle Tennessee.
Absolutely. I agree.
So what do you have coming up on the show today?
Well, there is a movement coming to Tennessee that I think Tennesseans should be aware of and leery of, and it's called Moral Mondays.
Oh, yeah, I heard about this.
Yeah, William Barber is behind that, and I'm extremely familiar with William Barber II, who calls himself a reverend, who did this in North Carolina for years. And so he's bringing that movement here, and so a bunch of, quote, protesters or what have you are meeting at a church at 2 o'clock, and then they're going to march to the Capitol with children's caskets.
Lovely.
Yeah. So
Lovely.
anyway, and then and they're going to talk about how Tennessee is immoral and how we need to be doing more about gun violence. I'm sorry, more about guns in the state of Tennessee instead of actually addressing the problem that it's the people that are using the guns killing people. That's the problem. So anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about that and a whole lot more.
Well, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it infuriates me when the national media descends upon our great city and steals a narrative and
it's been hijacked
and turns it away from the safety of our children and makes it about something that it was never about.
Right.
Continues not to be about.
Right.
It never had anything to do with race.
Right. Never. Not
it is,
1 second. Yeah. So it's been hijacked.
I very much look forward to hearing your program.
Thank you.
And great to have a Passover with you.
Good to see you. When do we see you again? Do you know?
Yes, on Wednesday.
On Wednesday. Excellent.
We'll be back.
All right. Well, we'll do another Passover then.
All right, Pamela. Thank you so much.
Talk to you later.
All right. And thank you for being with us on Super Talk 99.7 WTN.